Welcome back to another episode of the Outdoor Adventures Hunting Podcast, heard here on Brownfield and Agri America. I'm Brownfield anchor reporter Brent Barnett. Today's show is sponsored by Beck's. At Beck's, we are and will remain farmers at heart. On today's episode, we head to the state of Missouri to talk with Jason Isabelle from the Missouri Department of Conservation. Jason, thanks for joining us here on Outdoor Adventures. How are you today?
Happy to be here. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Well, first, tell us more about your work with MDC and what kind of your day-to-day duties are.
Sure. Yeah. So I serve as our cervid program supervisor or deer and elk program leader. And so I've got my staff and I have our hand in all things whitetail and elk. So everything from conducting research to help inform management, establishing our hunting seasons and hunting regulations, communication efforts with our hunters. Of course, a big focus us here in Missouri is managing chronic wasting disease in our whitetail herd. So we spend a lot of time conducting disease surveillance and working with other staff to do that, and also trying to manage the disease to minimize its effect on our whitetail population.
What led you to this career path and working with Missouri Department of Conservation? Did you grow up with a hunting background? Was that your passion?
I did. Yeah. I actually grew up in the northeastern U.S. in Vermont. My father was actually a game warden. And so I hunted and fished at a young age and realized when I was pretty young that I didn't really want to do anything else professionally other than be a biologist. And so I got an undergraduate degree in wildlife ecology, and that eventually led me to get a master's degree in wildlife ecology, and was very fortunate right out of grad school to get offered the opportunity to come to Missouri. And at that time, as the state's wild turkey biologist. So I worked with turkeys and rough grouse for the first 8 years of my time here at MDC. And then for the last 4 years or so, I've been working primarily with whitetails.
I grew up in Missouri myself, and, majority of my best hunting memories come from the state. And I'll be biased. I think it's one of the better states when it comes to hunting, Jason. If you go out and talk with folks, I feel like when whitetails come up, you hear about Kansas, Iowa, Illinois, but I think Missouri's kind of underrated.
We have some really good hunting here. Yeah, we've got great habitat, which supports a high number of whitetails. We've got some really nice deer. We've got a lot of deer, for the person that wants to go out and harvest deer for the freezer. We've got a lot of whitetails. If folks are interested in hunting older bucks and are interested in chasing antlers, we've got some really tremendous deer hunting as well. So yeah, of course I'm biased, being from Missouri and working for the Department of Conservation here, but we do have some very tremendous whitetail hunting. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm biased as well, so I'm right there with you. I do want to chat about the archery season. Missouri's is already opened up September 15th. And, Jason, we've had a cold front here already in October. And I know we're about to hit really a critical part of the season. So I'm sure it's, really an exciting time for folks to get out into the woods.
Yeah, it really is. The first part of the season was a little bit mild. But boy, like you said, last weekend we had a nice cold front come through and timed it just right for Friday, Saturday, and Sunday when most folks have time to hunt. And then it warmed up this week and, approaching 80 degrees. And then it doesn't happen very often, but here comes another cold front for the next weekend. So, I'd say for the average hunter that spends most of their time out there on the weekends, to have 2 October cold fronts 2 weekends in a row doesn't happen very often. So that should be really good. Should see some good daytime deer movement, give some comfortable conditions for hunters. And yeah, like a lot of states, we generally see a progressive increase in the number of bow hunters that are hitting the woods in October, and that peaks in late October and early November. Our primary firearms season will open on the 11th of November. And so that last week of October, those first 10 days of November, we'll see most of the folks in the woods. And obviously that's a super exciting time to be a bow hunter.
Oh yeah, everybody always gets ready for, November 1st or the month of November for the rut. But I'll be honest, some of my best hunts, whether I harvested a deer or not, experience wise, I've had a lot of good hunts in October, mid-October even. And I know there seems to be sometimes that notion out there that maybe the deer or the bucks don't really move during daylight those days. But, you kind of mentioned with that cooler weather, it can really get them up on their feet. And I feel like this could be a really, really pivotal time to be out there.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, I mean, you certainly, when you get the cold weather that comes through, you're going to see more movement than you are when it's unseasonably warm at, like we've been dealing with, during the early part of our season. So yeah, October can be great. It is a great month to be out there in the woods. You're probably on average not going to see the number of bucks that you're going to see towards the tail end of the month or even into early to mid-November, but there are a lot of nice deer taken in October, and a lot of nice deer taken in early to mid-October, not just late October.
I'm curious what the state's herd is kind of looking like. Do you have maybe an update on what the population trends have been like here of late, whether it be the last several years or so?
Yeah, our population's growing in most counties. So we in southern Missouri, our population's been steadily growing for decades now. We've been pretty conservative with antlerless harvest opportunities to allow that population to grow, and it's growing and doing well. And then in a lot of North Missouri counties, central Missouri counties, we had a really bad hemorrhagic disease outbreak in 2012, and that really hit our deer population really hard, and numbers declined pretty markedly after that HD outbreak. And so we became much more conservative with antlerless harvest opportunities after that HD outbreak to allow the population to rebound. And it really has. And to the point now where in most counties of the state, our deer numbers are right about where we want them to be. Hunters seem very satisfied with the number of deer. And we also survey agricultural producers every year too, to ask them what their opinions are on deer numbers. And we're at a really good point now because in most of our counties, the most common response to our surveys of hunters is that we have about the right number of deer in most counties. And the most common response we're hearing from agricultural producers is they feel like we have about the right number of deer. So I view it as kind of that sweet spot where we have enough deer in most areas to satisfy hunters, but not so many that they're causing a lot of undue burden on our producers. So we're in a good spot, but we also continue to see increases in deer numbers. So one of the big pushes that we've had in recent years is to try to increase the harvest of antlerless deer. And we've done that through liberalizations of a number of our regulations to try to, in a perfect world, we'd stabilize deer numbers right about where they are now. We'd be in really great shape.
For anybody that looks to travel to the state, let's just say you're non-resident hunters, give the listeners that maybe haven't been to the state an idea of the landscape and the habitat type that you could see across the state in different areas.
Yeah, it's a super diverse state. So if you go down, to southeast Missouri in the heart of the Ozarks, it's almost exclusively timbered ground, very rocky, shallow soils. Generally, deer abundance is lower there. The overall habitat quality is not what it is in other areas of the state. On average, we don't produce as large of bucks as we do there in some other areas of the state, just given the landscape and the resources available to the population. Then as you travel north from there, you get into central Missouri, which is a pretty nice mix of timbered ground and open ground, whether that's open grounds pasture or row crop. You start to get into some bigger deer, just given the type of landscape there. And then the further north you get a more open landscape, predominated by open ground, a lot more row crop, some pasture mixed in, and a decent amount of timber in certain areas. And then if you go to the extreme northwest, it opens up even more with even less timber. So again, pretty diverse. If you go all the way from the heart of the Ozarks, where it's 100% forest or virtually 100%, all the way to some northwest Missouri counties that have very little forest. And then we've got everything in between. And so obviously that translates into differences in deer numbers, differences in quality of the bucks that are produced. I mean, there are nice bucks produced in various areas of the state, but in terms of for those folks that are really interested in mature bucks and large antlers, generally folks are gravitating more towards the northern part of the state and even a lot of central Missouri. And then the western, so you get south of Kansas City and in southwest Missouri, a lot of open ground there, a lot of prairie, a lot of pasture. So there's a lot of variability in the state depending on, what hunters enjoy and what type of landscape they like to hunt in.
Yeah, and I think it's really cool when you look at that habitat diversity, Jason. I think it really opens the door for different hunting styles. When you mentioned some of the hardwoods timber you could get in the northern part of the state in different batches, but with that agricultural ground, that can also kind of change the game a little bit because you never know, those deer could bed in just the smallest of little sloughs or anything like that. They just kind of find whatever cover there is. So it can really kind of make you get out of your comfort zone a little bit and try different strategies.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, you talk about hunting, whitetails in North Missouri in the heart of ag country versus down in the heavily forested Ozarks, and it's an entirely different. It requires an entirely different strategy. I mean, you're still keying in on the basic needs of deer, cover, and food, and travel corridors. But yeah, you hunt down in the Ozarks where you're in the mountains, uh, and you're using the topography to kind of funnel deer more than you are in like North Missouri, where you're using bottlenecks and pinch points. It might be a little wooded draw running between a couple blocks of timber. So yeah, you if you hunt the different areas of the state, you have to learn to adapt your strategy based on where you are.
Now, one thing I am curious about, with folks going out during archery season, and we have firearm season coming up too, we'll talk about in just a bit. But what about public land opportunities? Are there state managed ground that hunters could have an opportunity to take advantage of?
There's lots of it here in Missouri. So we have about 1.5 million acres of public ground total. The U.S. Forest Service manages a large share of that. Most of that's in southern Missouri, but the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has a lot of ground around some of the reservoirs, and then our agency, the Missouri Department of Conservation, has what we call conservation areas. They're often called wildlife management areas in other states, but we've got them scattered throughout a lot of the state, and they're kind of unique in that there's different regulations on different areas. We have some that are archery only. We have some that are open to statewide regs, and then we have some that are only open to archery and muzzleloader methods. So depending on what your preference is for method, you have some choices there, and obviously those differences in methods result in different hunter densities. And so we try to scatter those different areas in different regions too, so that no matter what part of the state you're in, you have the option of going to different areas that have those different methods. And so we have some areas, really a diversity of land cover types, heavily timbered areas to open ag country and everything in between. But I would say if you're, for public land hunting, in terms of the availability of places to go, we are very fortunate to have the amount of public ground that we do, and to have it so well distributed that no matter where you are in the state, there's probably someplace fairly close that'll offer some hunting opportunity.
No, it's a really good resource to have. Very cool stuff. What would you say to a hunter that's maybe kicking around that idea of trying public land for the very first time?
Yeah, there are a number of different options. I would say do your homework. Like I said, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Forest Service have a bunch of ground, and those agencies can be contacted to get resources for maps and things like that. Our agency manages a lot of areas. Our website, you can find interactive maps of all the different areas. We've got, of course, downloadable PDFs that show the topography of the area, the land cover composition. So you can do a lot of the homework before you ever set foot on the area, just like with hunting any property, in terms of how big is the area, what's the access like, what's the topography like, and get an idea of what the hunting pressure might be like too. So I would say do a lot of your homework, as much of it in advance as you can. And then I would say also don't hesitate to pick up the phone and call one of the regional managers and say, hey, I'm interested in hunting your region of the state. Where do most hunters focus, and where might I be able to maybe get away from a little bit of the pressure? I wouldn't hesitate to reach out to our staff. They're happy to help. And then it's just a matter of putting boots on the ground and checking it out. But there's depending on what your preference is, there's almost something to fit everybody's needs out there.
Well, before you know it, the November firearms portion will be open. I'm sure this has to be one of the most popular seasons in the state. Growing up in Missouri, Jason, our family, it was basically like a holiday every year for opening day firearms season. I may even think I skipped a few classes from time to time to be able to do something like that. But, maybe just talk about the November firearms portion coming up and just some expectations for this year.
Yeah, so that's by far our most popular season. It's 11 days long, and it's time to start. Typically starts right at the peak of the rut. And so it's an exciting time to be in the woods. Obviously, mid-November is just a super time to be in the woods. You get to hear vocalizations that you won't hear at other times of the year. You see chasing, and it's just, the weather's great. And so, yeah, it's no wonder why it's our most popular season. And you're right, it is. It's like a holiday. If you drive down the roads on the Friday before opening day, you see a lot of blaze orange in the vehicles as folks are driving to their hunting camps. And so, yeah, I think we're in for a really good season. As I mentioned earlier, deer numbers are on the increase and have been for a number of years now. Of course, it depends a lot on what kind of weather you get on opening weekend too, and that obviously has a huge bearing on deer movement and what our harvest total will be. But I think, all things considered equal, it should be a really good season. We've got some changes. We've liberalized firearms antlerless permits in a lot of counties, so hunters will have some additional opportunities to harvest antlerless deer. Most of our counties will now allow 4 firearms antlerless permits to be filled, up from 2 last year, so that'll give folks some more opportunity as well. We also, right on the tail end of the November portion, we've actually got a new season this year that we're calling our CWD portion, and that'll basically be a 5-day portion right on the tail end of the November portion that'll give folks those extra days if they're in a CWD management zone county. So whereas the November portion ends on a Tuesday, those folks in the 52 management zone counties will be able to continue hunting right on through Thanksgiving and right on through that next Sunday. So it'll give them some extra time to harvest deer.
Now, just for anyone listening that may be curious, Jason, you said CWD. You're talking about chronic wasting disease. This has been something we've heard about for some time now. Maybe just explain to the listeners what CWD is and how the state has been moving forward in management of something like this.
Yeah, so CWD is a contagious fatal disease of whitetails and other members of the deer family. It's caused by a misfolded prion protein, which is kind of interesting. We typically think about diseases, we think about viruses and bacteria and parasites, but CWD is a pretty unique disease in that infectious agent is actually a protein. And so it's a huge threat to our cervid populations, huge threat to our whitetail herd here in Missouri. We first detected it just over 10 years ago, and unfortunately have detected it in 31 different counties now, and have had over 400 positives. And so it spreads from deer to deer, and can spread through the environment. If an infectious deer sheds the prions in the environment. And so poses a very significant threat to our whitetail population. And so we've been very aggressive in managing the disease to try to slow it down as much as we can. We have a number of regulations that are designed to slow the spread of the disease. And then we also, after the hunting season ends, go into what we call our CWD core areas, which are areas within a couple miles of a positive detection. And then we do what we call targeted removals and remove additional deer after the hunting season closes with landowner permission and landowner cooperation to try to remove as many positives off the landscape as we can to slow the spread and to try to reduce the deer densities in those localized areas, just to try to protect our population as much as we can. We know it's got some long term, if the disease continues to spread and more deer get infected, we know from some of the western states that it can cause some pretty significant population declines. And so we're doing everything that we can, working with our hunters and partners to be able to slow that spread as much as possible.
What have the trends been looking like here lately? Let's just say the last few years. Have there been any cases in the state of CWD?
In terms of the number of whitetails that we've had?
Yeah, I was curious if if you're seeing that any numbers pop up or any positive identifications, I guess.
Yeah, so unfortunately it is spreading in Missouri. We're working to slow that as much as we can, but it is spreading. We had 118 positives last year, and the year before that we'd had 86. And so, we are seeing the number of positives increase. We are seeing the number of counties where we've detected the disease increasing. But the good news is that even where we've had the disease the longest in the state, we're still seeing, if we go into those areas where we've had the disease the longest, we're still seeing a relatively small percentage of the deer population in those areas that are infected with it. And so there are, areas around the country that have had the disease longer, that haven't been, as successful managing the disease, where, there are certain areas in some states where half the adult bucks that get harvested are test positive, and over a third of the adult does, really high infection rates. And we're just not seeing that here in Missouri. At this point, our infection rates, if you look at the percentage of the deer that we test that test positive for the disease, it's less than 1% in all of the counties that we test, with the exception of of 1 last year. So thankfully, the infection rates are low, even though we do have the disease, fairly widely scattered in the state.
Now, if there is an infected deer, Jason, can they come out of it, or is it automatically a fatal disease?
No, it's 100% fatal. And the tricky part about this disease is it's got a long incubation period. So the deer gets CWD, and typically it's 18 to 24 months before it starts to look sick or show clinical symptoms. And meanwhile, the whole time, it's a disease of the brain. So meanwhile, the whole time, this animal is the brain is slowly deteriorating because the infectious proteins are continuing to build up and kill brain cells. And so it makes it a difficult disease to manage because this deer lives a relatively long time, but it's excreting those infectious agent prions in the environment that other deer can come in contact with. But then once it gets to that 18 to 24 month period, then it'll start to decline very rapidly, show clinical symptoms, and usually within weeks to months, it's dead. But it is 100% fatal.
How is this different from EHD, that disease in deer?
Yeah, so EHD is caused by a virus that's transmitted from deer to deer by a midge fly or no-see-um. EHD, although we do see outbreaks periodically that are pretty severe, like the one I mentioned in 2012, it's not something that we're worried about long-term for our health of our whitetail populations. They bounce back from it. So in years that we have, especially drought years, we can see some pretty significant mortality. The deer die very quickly from the virus. But then as soon as we get a frost in the fall, the midges die, the disease transmission cycle is broken, and it really ends for the year. So it's very, very sporadic, whereas CWD is just, there's no end to the cycle. And so as more and more deer become infected, the chances of them infecting other deer increase. Like I said, it's 100% fatal. It also predisposes deer to other causes of mortality too. So that whole time that deer's alive, that has CWD, it's got a greater chance of being harvested by a hunter, or hit by a car, or killed by a predator, because that disease is slowly deteriorating in its brain. So hunters sometimes confuse the two diseases, but they're very different. One of the most significant differences, as I mentioned, is HD we're just not worried about in terms of the long-term health of the population. With CWD, we're very concerned about it.
What should a hunter do, Jason, if, let's just say, they're out in the woods and maybe they see a whitetail that's showing some very odd symptoms? Have you ever received a call along that line?
Yeah, we do get those calls, and what I always tell folks to do is just reach out, pick up the phone, call us. What we'll usually do is depending on the circumstances, we'll often call the local conservation agent, and if the deer is in really rough shape to where it's likely not going to recover from whatever it is that whatever disease it has or injury, then they will often put the deer down and we'll go ahead and test it. So it depends. I mean, there's a wide variety of diseases in whitetails. They do get, of course, injured, hit by a car. And so just because you see a deer that looks sick does not necessarily mean it's CWD. We'd have to do a test to confirm that. But the best thing to do is just pick up the phone, call us, and we'll get the appropriate person there, or give you the best advice possible, depending on what the situation is.
Yeah, they really are resilient animals. They really are. Lastly here, just kind of on this topic, any deer harvested during the season, can hunters offer up their animal to be tested? What's that process look like?
Yes, we do offer free testing throughout the entire deer season. So no matter when you shoot the deer during the season, or where you live in Missouri, we've got opportunities for testing at no cost. And so there's a variety of ways they can do that. If they go to our website, mdc.mo.gov/CWD, we've got all the information on there. We offer testing at regional offices. We have taxidermists and meat processors that we partner with that pull samples. We've got self-service freezers that we have in our CWD management zone, where folks can drop off the head at their convenience. So lots of different opportunities are widely scattered throughout the state. And so if folks are interested in having their deer tested, definitely hop on our website and find a spot to do that that's close to their home.
Is there some optimism moving forward, Jason, that CWD will slow down on spread?
Yes. Certainly there is, and I think our success thus far has demonstrated that we've been able to slow the spread of the disease through our management efforts. So absolutely, we're doing everything we can to slow the spread, and we've got evidence to show that is effective. in the end, what everybody is hoping for is a breakthrough, a vaccine, or a cure that could be developed. Long term, that would be the best case scenario, and what we're all hoping for. And that is an area of active research. There are folks that are working on developing a vaccine for CWD. We have not gotten there yet, but hopefully we will. So our goal in the meantime is, we know if we don't do anything from a management standpoint, the disease is going to spread faster. It's going to impact more of our population. And if that vaccine does come at some point in the future, we want our white-tailed population to be as healthy as it possibly can. And so we're doing everything we can to slow that spread as much as we can, minimize its impact on our deer population while we keep our fingers crossed and hope for that vaccine at some point down the road.
Well, really appreciate you sharing some of this info with us here today on chronic wasting disease. Really good information there, Jason. We do have a few minutes left, and I know the state just recently here capped off its early antlerless portion season. Talk about what this season is to the listeners and what the results were this year.
Yeah, so this is a new season for us. It was, we've got increasing deer populations in most of the state, yet our deer numbers are about where we want them to be. So we've got a pretty liberal season as it stands already, but we wanted to try to find some additional ways to give folks some additional opportunities to harvest antlerless deer to help our manage our deer herd. And so there are several Midwestern states that have similar early antlerless portions, so we certainly weren't the first to do it, but we wanted to provide folks an opportunity, give them an early opportunity with a firearm to harvest antlerless deer ahead of the November portion. What we tend to see for a lot of hunters is the November portion gets here, it's the rut, and many folks shift their attention to harvesting an antlered buck, and sometimes antlerless deer can be an afterthought, and we really need to be shooting more antlerless deer. So the thought with the early antlerless portion is, let's give folks an opportunity in early October when the weather is generally pretty pleasant. A lot of folks' freezers are empty from last year. Give them the first chance to go out there with a firearm and harvest antlerless deer. And thus far, it seems to have been very well received. We got pretty fortunate and then got some really good weather with that cold front coming through Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for the 3-day season. So it was really just super weather-wise. Shot just shy of 16,600, which is in the ballpark. I was thinking we'd shoot somewhere between 15 and 20,000, and we were within that range. And so yeah, a new opportunity for us. And we had surveyed our hunters on the front end to make sure that it was something that our hunters wanted to have happen, and we had really good support. Much more support than we did opposition. And that's one of the reasons we decided to move forward with that early opportunity. And like I said, the folks that I've heard from, most of the folks I've heard from since then, I've really enjoyed that opportunity to get out there. I heard about a lot of people that took youths out that were able to harvest deer when the weather is generally nicer. As you know, we get into November and certainly into December and it gets colder. It's harder to stay out there for any length of time, especially for our younger hunters or new hunters. So it presented them with pretty unique opportunity to go out there when the weather is really pleasant and add some meat for the freezer.
No, that's a really good point you make, because you get there, let's just say early January. Yeah, it doesn't feel the same as early on in the season. It's like night and day difference, much more comfortable. So I'm sure, yeah, hunters were probably pleased to have that opportunity.
Yeah, I'd say it was a big success. We owe a lot to the weather. Like I said, it was great, but I think it'd be something that folks will look forward to in future years too, and a good way to, as I mentioned, help manage our deer population and get some meat in the freezer at the same time.
Now, once we get past the firearm season, Jason, what are some of the other seasons that you have in place?
Yeah, we've got a lot of different portions of firearm season. So at the end of this month, we'll have a 2-day early youth portion. And then after that, we'll have the primary November portion, the 11th through the 21st of November. Right after that, we'll have the new CWD portion that'll run in the CWD management zone. That's a 5-day portion on the tail end of the November portion. And that does overlap with our 3-day late youth portion that's open statewide, the 24th through the 6th of November. Then we have a little bit of a break, and then we actually have a late antlerless firearm season. So it's kind of the counterpart to the early antlerless portion. So we have the 3-day early antlerless portion in October that's already come and gone. And then in December, we'll have a 9-day late antlerless portion with a firearm to give folks some more opportunity to harvest antlerless deer. And then the very last firearms portion we have will be alternative methods portion, which will be in late December and early January. And then, of course, bow season will run all the way through the 15th of January. So we're just on the front end of the season. There's all kinds of archery and firearms hunting opportunity ahead. So a lot to look forward to for our hunters.
Yep, it's definitely a great time to be in the woods. Jason, thanks so much for taking some time to join us here on our podcast, and best of luck to all the hunters in Missouri, and wish you all the best there at MDC.
Thanks very much. Have a good day.
Again, that's Jason Isabelle with the Missouri Department of Conservation, right here on Brownfield's Outdoor Adventures. I'm Brent Barnett.